Welcome to the Community Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Kallio, Senior Solutions Marketing Manager for Acre Access Control and Mobile Solutions. In reality, we do business with people in our community that we know, like, and trust. My guest and good friend with me today is Darcy Cook from Safety Trainers. Safety Trainers specializes in first aid, CPR, AED, and OSHA training, plus a whole lot more. Today, we're going to focus on the considerations for the K-12 school market. Hi, Darcy. How's it going?
It's good, Jason.
Awesome to see you. Okay, so the first thing I really wanted to talk to you about was something similarly we have, is that we have in our software the ability to do mustering. So when we say mustering, people say, well, what does that really mean? It's the reality of knowing who's in your building and then being able to account for them in the situation of an emergency, which also includes not only your employees, but students, visitors, any contractors that might be in the building, that type of thing. So tell me more about what you get involved in when it comes to the fire drill side of things.
Yeah, thanks. So typically here's the deal. We get calls from schools, towns, cities, communities, when a couple different things happen. Number one, a lot of the private schools, charters, Montessori's, the summer programs, which are all privately held, they are very in tune with the requirements for having specific trainings here for first aid, CPR, AED, practicing evacuation drills, practicing fire, the fire drills, a spill drill, communication, right? How do we get a hold of the right people under the right circumstances? You never know who's going to be in a building at a certain time, okay? So when we talked about the public school is really good at practicing fire drills, right? Everyone knows, even the companies, right? Hey, it's the annual fire drill. Everyone knows when it's coming. They know the day that it's happening. They know the time that it's happening. They pre-coached every employee kid that it's going to happen at this time. Right. They usually line it up before lunch break or right after a lunch break.
When
right?
It's convenient.
When it's convenient. It's not going to disrupt the whole entire day. Okay. So all of that isn't real. Right? And so it's very structured and controlled. We'll often see them kids lining up 2 by 2. They walk down the same hall. They walk the same way. Every drill, like nobody's blocking off a door. Nobody's mixing it up, right? It's a fire drill. You hear the alarm, you get up, you line up, you walk out the door, you go to a point and you meet. And in most cases, they don't continue to practice actually what their emergency action plan tells them to practice. They think that just because they've heard the alarm, they got outside, they got together in a group, the drill's over and they did a successful good drill. Not really the case. What we find is that, schools, what they have to do is block off a door, get a group of kids, right, herding, moving behind a teacher, following them,
right.
Get to a door that's actually technically blocked or it's unsafe to travel, and then try to practice turning all those kids around. Now you're in the back of that group and getting them to go in another direction, hoping that the child or children on the other end have those leadership skills and the confidence to lead the rest of the group while the teacher's getting around. I mean, in a real drill, it's chaotic, it's loud, it's noisy. It's not, you don't have the time associated with it. So my opinion is when you're going to practice an evacuation drill, you need to create some real life situations or scenarios. Change those up a little bit. Now, when you get outside of the building, schools, just like all companies and businesses, you got to make sure you got all those people accounted for. Right. And one of the biggest challenges and the biggest aha moments during a drill is that people realize that they don't have an efficient or effective or quick process for identifying everyone who's in there building along the way. So I have some people they take the attendance in the morning, they print those attendance rosters, they keep them readily available like on old school paper because they grab the paper during a drill and they bring the paper out. I have some that are like, oh, well, we can look up teachers and faculty maybe in our payroll system, right? Like they could be done electronically on the phone. And then people like, oh, well, we have another building that we could go to. But what happens when, internet's down, when access changes? So there's a lot of these aha moments that happen if you really run a dynamic, detailed fire drill. The other side is, we're talking about fire drill, but there are a lot of other reasons people evacuate buildings. And so using the fire alarm as a means to get out of the building doesn't actually communicate the right message necessarily to the people who are hearing a fire alarm go off.
Right. A lot of things I hear you keep saying right now revolve around the fact of human behavior. Because the reality is that as soon as fear, actual fear happens, that's a completely different ballgame. So when it comes to that practicing, do you think it's best if somebody can simulate, like, I don't know, use dry ice to make it look like smoke, or get a smoke machine, right? That puts that there, because then that actually might create a little bit of reality and anxiety that somebody wasn't really expecting in their drill that they were doing.
You and I know fight or flight.
Right.
So in an emergency where actually all of a sudden all that adrenaline and all that energy starts going, some people are going to freeze, some people are going to panic, some people are going to take leadership and lead. You don't know who those people are.
Right.
And you can't really simulate that. It's a challenge to simulate that doing traditional basic drills, right? You need to actually, elevate your game, so to speak, as I talk about it when you're doing that. And you need to create that diversity. You're assuming that the teacher is going to be here on the day this happens and we don't have a substitute teacher.
Oh, true.
You're assuming that the teacher's in the classroom when this happens, because as the students get older, can the teacher leave the room? It's not like it's kindergarten. There's, with an aide and a second person. Like, could a middle school teacher walk out, not even be in the classroom when something happens because they're addressing another need or something outside the classroom? Yes, we need to be more dynamic in our thought and our engagement in scenario-based practice of drills. And that requires planning, practice, execution, and assessment. So when it's all done, while you're out there in the moment, you got to figure out what went well and what didn't work well, where are our gaps, and what do we need to do to improve those gaps. And again, so realistic drills, number one. Number two, getting out there, how do we account for our people? Visitors, guests, contractors. I will tell you, definitely in school systems, also in companies and businesses, so I know this is also a challenge that continues school systems. Contractors come through the door. We leave them unattended. We don't stay with them the whole time that they're there. We're using the same contractors so they get comfortable. They know the school, property and facilities guys are comfortable with them, so we leave them be. We just ran a drill the other day, and the entire cleaning staff was there. They didn't know what to do. They didn't leave the building. Some of them did come out of the building. They got in their cars. Some of them left and went home. They didn't stay. They didn't sign into the original log, right? So accountability, trackability. So you have to take this conversation outside of just your staffing, right?
Right.
Who are our vendors and contractors that are coming into our school systems on a regular basis? Are they up to speed with the plan? Do they understand what the expectation is, the plan? And do we have a way to account for them? Because no one wants to send police and fire into a building looking for people who aren't in our buildings.
Right. Okay, so that's kind of what I'll define as during school, but there are a lot of activities that are before school, after school.
Yes.
And from an access control perspective, we always are saying, and visitor management is the reality that we're managing the time that somebody's allowed in the building and the days, right, when you can or cannot get into a building. So you have the ability to be able to do that. What are the issues that end up coming up in the safety space then for the before and after school programs?
So I love the fact that you're talking about the accountability for people at the beginning and ends of days, because one of my biggest concerns is always when people allow this flexible kind of scheduling where there's no rules about 2 people in at the beginning of the day and 2 people out at the end of the day. So a person is opening up the school, or a person is setting up the basketball court for the upcoming game on Saturday where the school's going to be filled with people or whatever. It's a person, or at the end of the day, it's a person closing down. It's flicking off the last set of lunch turn thing. That one person by themselves. How do I know that you left the building? How do I know that you're safe? Like, how do I track that? Texting, communication, a key fob system in and out, an alarm that says, okay, Darcy's in the building, and after a certain period of time, the alarm goes off because I haven't left the building and I should have left the building. It's kind of like, I the analogy or thing that I sometimes talk about is the life alert. You know, your medical, your mom, your grandmom, right?
Yep.
Right? We give them a life alert.
Yep.
And if they have a problem, they push the button.
Right.
Fitness centers have started to do that. So you can walk into a fitness center, those 24-hour gyms, put a life alert on, run on the treadmill, something happens to you because there's no staff there, they click the button, right?
Oh, okay.
Same thing in our school systems, right? So in our school systems, as in companies and businesses, you know, what are we doing to manage and control time in, time out, who's there? For our before and after school, one of the challenges for them also is that all the key personnel have left, right? So most time, your nurse is going to be gone, right? The head of facilities and maintenance might be. You might have a custodial person, but it might be the part-time custodial guy that comes in at nighttime who's not your primary custodial guy or woman that's there. And so at the beginning and the end of the day, for example, on the emergency side of first aid, CPR, ED, you've got kids before school, you have kids after school, you have kids with medical conditions, concerns, someone could start to choke, depending on geographically where you're located, if you have to use crosswalks, you know, someone getting hit, you've got to play out all these scenarios. You've got to have a plan together. A lot of the before and after school might be teachers' aides, might be student teachers learning to teach. You might actually not even, you know, have more than one or two actual, you know, educators in the building. You definitely don't have nurses and assistant nurses, you know, or nurses' aides at the beginning or end of these school days. They're dealing with public, you know, the general public, so they have to worry about, you know, de-escalation, anger, aggression, you know, weapons. They need intoxication, you know, potentially, you know, an influencer or, you know, stranger danger coming in. They need to think about, obviously, the kids' well-being from a first aid perspective. Should something happen to them medically? Do I make the decision? Do I call the nurse to make the decision? What's our protocol? So when you talk about human behavior, what we want to see companies doing is laying out all these scenarios, practicing all these scenarios, and then actually writing down exactly what they want their staff to do, how they want them to think, how they want them to communicate, showing them the tools and resources. There's nothing worse that, like in a before or after school program, all of a sudden you realize that you need some kind of supplies, first aid supplies, AED supply, you need some kind of supplies. Kid falls off the jungle gym, gets hit, real situation happened in my town, kid had a heart condition, collapsed, they had to do CPR on him, you know, on the playground at the school.
Wow.
Beautiful story, child has grown up, made it through high school, it's a great ending. However, in that whole process, that's the worst time for you actually to be opening up and looking at supplies and materials to actually see what you have.
And you're hoping.
Yeah, what's in here? Yeah. And now you're reading boxes and trying to figure it out. Because although you might have gone through first aid, CPR, and AED training, most first aid, CPR, AED trainings, unless you take ours, don't open up your supplies. Don't go pull things off the wall and be like, what do you got? What, you know, what's in here that you need? What would you know, because if you've ever opened up a first aid kit, they're neat and organized.
Right.
Everything's shoved in a box.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what you can shove in a box, right? And so you're like, in a box, so now you have to read the name of every single box to actually figure out what you have in there. You open up your medicine cabinet, you know what Pepto-Bismol is, it's pink, right? You know what the title is. So the wrong time on these before and after school programs, same kind of thing is they need to run and practice these drills. They need to open up their tools, equipment, and resources. They got to figure out how far away these tools, equipment, and resources are. And people, what if there's only two of us? One stays, one goes. Who's going to unlock a door, right? How do people get in? Knox boxes, that's another conversation typically, right? Is how do people get in and access? Do we pre-program something? Do we give them key fobs? We just recently did that with one of the, a business in town. We put Knox boxes and they gave them all key fobs to actually be able to get in. So the police have them now, the fire have them now, to make it all different. So before and after becomes more challenging than the day because you have less skilled, trained, and decision makers available during those hours.
All right, so you brought up two things that I think are really, really important. Everybody understands the concept of first aid and a first aid kit. Okay, concept, yes. AED though, because we've been friends for so long at this point, of course I know what that is, but probably most people, or a lot of them maybe don't. So what is an AED? What are the things that you need to really be considering? And how does the first aid and AED kits, how do those align?
Yeah, so the first thing about the AED, it's an automated external defibrillator, fancy name, AED. Basically, need to think about it as they're designed for out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. So when someone's heart stops working, these units have been designed, programmed, and are so safe that kids without training can actually take them off the wall and use them.
Okay.
So that statement, so safe, you can't make a mistake, you can't hurt someone, even a child can take it off the wall and use it. People really need to let that sit in and realize that when you see it in your local bank, when you see it at the athletic field, when you see it, wherever you see it, whether you've had training or not, these are literally designed for out-of-hospital cardiac arrest for everyone to be able to use. The key is having the courage to open the box, take it out, hit the on button, and listen and follow directions. These units actually talk you through step by step exactly what to do and how to do it. Now, with school systems, we do the training. Their school systems are required to have AEDs. They're required to have them during athletic performances. They're required to have them in the schools. So not all companies and businesses are required to have them, but school systems are. So the thing behind that is I often go to a school, and again, we're teaching them training, and nobody's actually taken the AED. Thank goodness, nothing's happened, right? But they actually have never touched it, looked at it. Like, they all do the same thing, but the color's a little different, the shape's a little different, the button's on a little different side. In an emergency, as we mentioned, fight or flight, you go back to what you know. Your subconscious kind of takes over. So if you touched your own unit, practice with your own unit, understand your own unit, it's going to make it a lot easier in the moment when you have to do something. When we do training, the only thing we can promise you as a result of spending the time in these classes with us, not to mention we teach skills, but practical application, is that having a plan will be better than not having a plan at all. However, there's a difference between, going through the motions, right? And kind of checking boxes, and actually looking at your plan, practicing your plan, using your tools and resources that are written into your plan. So taking the AED off the wall and really getting the before school teachers and educators, the after school teachers and education, remember, less support and resources, make sure they really touch and understand it, as well as your coaches, your admin staff. Again, you never know who's going to be available. One of the things we typically find, so here's a tip to everyone, if you guys have an AED, whoever's listening to this right now, go into your AED box. There should be a first aid kit attached to your AED box.
Okay.
And a lot of times, it's the first thing we realize it's not. And the first aid kit's not even near the AED.
Okay.
In order for you to be able to put an AED on someone, you need to be able to get the stickers, the pads, to stick right to the skin.
Okay.
Which means hairy chests, lotions, potions, dyes, body jewelry, metal. There are things that you're going to have to potentially get rid of or move out of the way. If you bring an AED and you have someone who's got, a thick carpet, let's say, on their chest, dad, right? You can't actually put the AED on them because the pads will never adhere to the skin and it will be ineffective. Okay, yeah. Having these kits attached to the AEDs, so that's number one. But number two is opening up and seeing what's in the kits. Typically, we will find that the kits have one classic, generic razor, straight blade razor, no shaving cream in the kit. Okay. If I actually had to shave your chest, one razor's not getting me very far. Okay. And I'm not running to the sink to wash it, rinse it, and clean it out and come back and, right? I need to have a package of razors so I can go like this, just kind of whip through it so I can wipe it all down and get it on you. So typically we find there's inadequate in terms of resources, and the other thing is gauze. I mean, if I'm ripping hair out of your chest, we're probably going to have a little blood, right?
Okay, wait a minute, but hold on. I got a question, because now I have an immediate vision in my head. Should we just be using sticky tape?
Duct tape?
Just put it on there, rip it off, get a nice, nice strip of skin. Is that what we should be doing?
Basically, the clean.
Wasn't that 40-Year-Old Virgin, I think, in that movie?
Oh my God, which is hilarious.
Yes, made me want to cry. Okay, joking aside, is that actually an option?
Yeah. So we don't encourage you to take duct tape, and do a quick waxing of the chest, right? The guidelines, right? ICHA, right? American Heart, Red Cross, National Safety Council, right? They have best practices under first aid training. We got
practices.
We got to stay in our box. Right? So now, if it was a family or friend, I would do whatever it takes. But like in my box, in the workplace, we got to stay in that box. But if you don't have enough razors, then you will not be able to get to where you need to be in order to actually help the person. Same idea. So Jay, you're going to totally laugh when you go this. You're going to be like, So any of you right now who have a first aid kit, go open it up right now.
Right.
You're going to find gauze. Important for bleeding, except you're going to find one piece of gauze in a piece of paper, and you're going to find 20 pieces in your little gauze box. So now I have to rip open and pull out one piece at a time, 25 times to get this much gauze. I'm better off using my shirt, my sock.
Right.
And at the end of the day, if you're going to be going to the doctors, the hospital, the ambulance is coming, who cares if it's sterile or not? You need to buy a roll, a wad of gauze that you burst open, you grab it, and you do what you need to do.
Right.
So typically with these first aid and AED kits, they have outside providers that are buying them. There's an ANSI standard that tells them what has to be in them.
Sure.
But let's apply some common sense.
Right.
You only learn common sense, though, unless you actually practice and realize, hey, wouldn't it make sense if we had a few more razors? Wouldn't it make sense if we had a wad of, gauze or whatever the case may be? So, it just goes back to changing behavior, but directing that behavior and practicing the behaviors that you want people to do.
I think you said something that really makes a lot of sense, common sense. That your training will give people that common sense as opposed to saying somebody that put together their plan, I've got the AED on the wall, I've got my first aid kits, and they think that is the plan.
That they're ready to go.
And not good. Okay, so all of these things then, and you've said this multiple times, it all revolves around communication. Because it's communication in your training, communication in the protocol of execution, and you need to communicate in some situations to your entire team, as well as maybe external, because you need to get...
when I'm showing up, when something's going on.
Right. So let's talk a little bit more then about communication, because for us, on the access control side, we have a lot of process automation and workflow capabilities that allow text messages to go out immediately. So like, for example, somebody can take their piece of plastic that's there, or a fob, right? And these days, of course, we have mobile credentials, so it could be your phone, or even a keypad, so you have the numbers on it. But for example, somebody could have the capability, all teachers in a building, double tapping on a reader would automatically put the school into, say, lockdown, okay? So, and that then has a workflow and a process that's attached to that makes a lot of things happen. So let's talk, though, about communication on your side and the things that you feel are really important.
So the first thing is create one. Create communication. Got to have written communication, got to have verbal communication, and you have to have technology that allows you to communicate quickly, okay? The other thing is, I like to say it straight so it doesn't come out crooked. If you've ever been to a hospital, if you ever sat in an emergency room, code blue, red, orange, green, rainbow bright, right? You put 8 million different hidden codes out there. They need a textbook to try to look up to know exactly what's supposed to be going on right now. So in communication in school systems, it's always about say it straight so it doesn't come out communicated. Whether you're using a two-way radio among the maintenance and facilities and the custodial team, right? Or the field staff who are outside taking care of the fields, if you're using two-way radio communication, if you use a PA system, if you have a one-call system, if you have some kind of app on your phone that sends out a message or pings everyone all at once. I think we're all familiar with that with our own communities. Typically we get weather warnings that come to our phone.
Right.
Or if you've had children in school system, you get like what we call like a one call that goes out, which is a pre-recording usually from a superintendent on snowy days or whatever the case may be. I want to take those strategies and then newer strategies and and I want these schools to start to implement them A lot of them are just behind the times on technology and
Sure.
the capabilities of it.
Sure.
And they're trying to do things off of paper, or they're trying to do it from memory. And again, on any given day, you have no idea who the people are, the resources are, what the temperature is going to be out. I just ran a drill 2 days ago. It was sunny, but it was freezing out. Now that same company ran drills, last in the summer, which it was warm and sunny, it wasn't a big deal. But yesterday when we ran the drill and we were all freezing cold outside, it made everyone think about these drills differently and what resources. So now they have raincoats, they have the Mylar blankets out there because they don't have another place to go. So again, when we run this in terms of communication, my thing is accountability of people and telling people what the problem is. So the first thing is, how do you let everyone know in your building, people who are on their way to the building, people who are outside of the building, what's happening and taking place? Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing is, now we get everyone, let's say, evacuated because it's a situation where we either have to shelter in place or evacuate. Either way, how do we continue that communication? Text messaging, electronic systems, like what are we using? And then, of course, outside the building, if we've had to do a complete and total evacuation, as mentioned, we don't want to send anyone in a building looking for people who aren't in there. And so these schools have to have a very quick way. I mean, these response times from our EMS, police, fire, EMT, 4 minutes. Like, once they get the call, they're typically on site within 4 minutes. So you as an organization have less than 4 minutes in the middle of all the chaos to figure out that you have everyone accounted for. Visitors, guests, parents, employees of all departments. And then who came into the building and didn't come into the building, like the side. Like, we would need to control everything through the front of the building, or an electronic access system that makes sure that we know where everyone is.
Right. Okay, so yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so one of the scariest, sadly, that we have to deal with situations is, of course, the active shooter drill. We talked about the fire drill earlier, but the reality is the active shooter drill. And before we got taping, you said something to me that I actually hadn't even thought of, which again goes into why you need to use a company like yours to be very honest about the reality of human behavior and why you need to consider things. And the thing that you said was you don't want to pull the fire alarm during an active shooter drill because it sends the message, we're having a fire drill. It doesn't tell what's actually happening. And that's that communication piece that we've also talked about. So walk us through a little bit more about the active shooter drill, because of course from our perspective, we're all about the security, cameras, the ability to be able to see what's going on, lockdowns. Lockdown means different things for a lot of different people. Yeah. Immediate communications that are going to the staff to let them know what's going on outside the building too. So first responders, and we know what's happening. So walk me through from your perspective.
Yeah, so a couple things. There are two big philosophies, I think, or two skill sets in which school systems are learning from. Here in the New England area, especially here in Massachusetts, where you and I are, ALICE principles are what we teach our school, which is a little different than what most of you would be familiar with when a lot of these campaigns were launched, which is the Run, Hide, Fight campaigns that came from federal or FEMA, right, along the way. And the conversation that you and I have been having is not so much about, it's deeper. We're having a vertical conversation. We're not having a superficial check the box kind of conversation. And although Run, Hide, Fight tells you part of the story on the federal level, something like ALICE and its ALICE principles actually teach you skills. I've written a program called the Survivor's Mindset. It literally takes all the data of the history of the facts that we know from every workplace violence active shooter and school systems that we have. Okay. It takes all that data with the science of how our brain works, OODA loop, right? So OODA loop is a process that your brain actually does. It's 2.7 seconds. And every time you are disrupted in a process that you think that you're tackling, it resets your OODA loop, and actually your brain has to go all the way back to the beginning and then catch up to where you were. So that seconds of a delay is actually the window for a survivor's mindset. So again, running the drills and practicing them in real life situations, number one. I love it when the police department comes in, which is fantastic, which brings that elevated level of fight or flight response in, because you've got the police department shooting off loud air guns, right, that make the noises,
right.
and they're yelling, and they're moving you in real time. And the truth is, if you're really running the drills correctly and using your local department sources, there are people on the ground you're stepping over if you're actually running the drill correctly, right? So that brings in that elevated element, which is critical to a survivor's mindset, right? And then the other part of the practice of workplace violence active shooter would then be understanding the response options in a survivor's mindset. So you talked about shelter in place, and that really was a terminology. Think back in the 80s when, like in California, gangs were driving by the schools, shooting from the outside into the schools.
Yes.
That's where shelter in place kind of started.
Yep.
So everyone would shelter in their rooms, hide in the corner, get away from the windows, so on and so forth, and wait till the bad guys went away. This is different. Now they're coming into our schools. They're coming through the door. So, I've seen more schools using hurricane glass now. All right, not necessarily bulletproof glass, but hurricane glass, a little more cost effective. The idea is, how do we slow down the intruder? How do we keep locked doors, many doors? The idea of having more key fobs is what I strongly encourage, potentially to those hallways or offices of where that individual potentially will be looking to go, right? So the idea is to slow them down and delay the process. We want everyone to get out, because if they're inside the building, the more people that get out, survive, right? We don't have a history of people running out of the building, behind the people running out of the building, shooting the people in the back. The history will show us they go inside in the building, get out, you're safe. The other part about so evacuation first. The next part is called barricade. That means if you can't get out, or you freeze, fight, flight, freeze,
sure.
Phrase, what are you going to do to keep yourself separated, slow them down, deter them? So you should actually be practicing something called barricade, putting all the furniture in front of a door, taking an old fire hose, which is great. Fire departments are really good about doing this, cutting it up into pieces, taking that section of the fire hose, sliding it on the door that opens, so the door can't, right? Because you can't lock doors in school systems, right, inside the doors. So things like go kits. So now in classrooms, they have things like go kits. These are go buckets, things that you can throw. So if someone were to, if an active shooter situation occurred and that person was determined to come through that door, after you put furniture in front of it, you barricade it, locked it, did whatever you could to keep them down, you slowed them down. By the way, while they're trying to get through the door, that means they're not shooting people.
Right.
Okay, so it gives other people a chance to get out.
Right.
And as they're coming through that door, the idea behind response officer is when they breach and they come through the door, you don't wait to let them in, you respond immediately, looking to create harm, to separate them from the gun, or just anything to get you and get them out of the whole piece. In the response options element too, we also talk about and train to the roles within the room, because it could be 3 or 4 of us in there, or just one, right? But the idea is fight or flight. Some will step up, some will grab that fire extinguisher and be ready to go, while others will be incapable of doing that.
Sure,
right?
absolutely.
But those are the ones that you also want them being able to communicate from the inside what's going on to the outside, because I recently worked with a fire department and a police department locally, and the police and fire here in New England are starting to make some changes, which I'm thrilled about. So before, we were taught and told that the police department is there to neutralize the threat. So that means all of those who have been injured and hurt along the way, we're going to step over you because we got to go neutralize the threat. Now they've been training so that the police are clearing areas and they're isolating and cornering where that active shooter is, so that they are allowing EMS and fire to come into the building sooner than ever before now, and start triaging everyone else. Because we teach a Stop the Bleed course, and the Stop the Bleed course is literally designed for basically construction workers, people who work alone, and active shooter situations where people can self-tourniquet and know how to tourniquet and know how to tourniquet each other. The idea was you had to take care of each other because there was going to be a delayed response, knowing that the police had to neutralize before they were going to let EMS and fire come in. They've started to change that because if they can isolate and corner, which comes down to video cameras, communication, right? The faster we know where this person is, the sooner we can get help to the victims, isolate and neutralize the threat and control the whole process. So.
Yeah, absolutely.